First of all, thank you for giving me the opportunity. And I hope, I don't know how much time you have after I say a few words. Maybe I can hear from more of you as well. But let me respond to a little bit of what I've heard so far. First of all, if I can make a generic point. The words of a president matter. No matter if they're good, bad, or indifferent, they matter. No matter how competent or incompetent the president is, they can send a nation to war, they can bring peace, they can make markets rise or fall, and they can do things that I've observed can make a difference just by what they say. You know, I got out of law school, and I moved back to Delaware. I had a partial scholarship to go away. We didn't have a law school at the time in Delaware. I went to Syracuse Law School. When I came home from law school, what happened was my last semester, the only two political heroes I ever had, both were assassinated, Dr. King and Bobby Kennedy. As a matter of fact, Kennedy was assassinated the day I graduated. And I came home, and my city is the only city in the United States of America occupied by the military since Reconstruction for 10 months. Every single corner with someone, a military person, standing with a drawn bayonet. Not a joke. 10 months. And I had a job with a good law firm, a well-known law firm, one of the oldest law firms in the state. And after a while, I concluded that I was in the wrong place. They were good people, but I quit and became a public defender. And I used to interview my clients in what they call the Northeast Corridor, where Amtrak runs from, Washington to New York. That area goes right through my city. And I used to interview clients down in the basement of that train station before they were arraigned. And here I was thinking that, and we have the 8th largest black population of any state in the nation as a percent of population. And we were, to our great shame, a slave state. And although we were one of those border states who fought on the side of the North, thank God. But anyway, make a long story short, what happened was I thought black and whites would never be in my city talking to each other again. And here I was then, literally 40 years later to the month, on January 17th, standing on the platform of that very same train station and looking out over what we call the East Side, which had been burned to the ground, literally. It had been completely leveled. When things get burned out, they come in and level everything. And then across the Christina River, they called the 3rd Street Bridge. It was all overwhelmingly 100% African-American community. And I was standing on that platform on January 17th waiting for a black man to come 26 miles from Philadelphia to pick me up and take me on a train ride to Washington, D.C. with 10,000 people standing down below cheering. And my son, Bo, was alive then. He was the Attorney General of the state of Delaware at the time. And my daughter, who's a social worker, ran the largest criminal justice program in the state. And my son, my middle son, who was running the World Food Health Program, the World Food Program USA, the largest program in the world. And I called them up, and all of a sudden hit me. Here I was, and that whole area has been rebuilt. And 3rd Street Bridge is still in a little bit of trouble, but things have moved. And I said, don't tell me things can't change. I told them about the story. Am I violating social distancing here, walking up? I guess I am. Sorry. Yeah. And I said, don't tell me things can't change. And I told the story and reminded them what it was when I was a young attorney. But I made a mistake about something. I thought you could defeat hate. Hate only hides. It only hides. And when someone in authority breathes oxygen under that rock, it legitimizes those folks to come out front of the rocks. And And I hadn't planned on running for anything again after my son had died. And I was a professor at a college and running another program at another college. Until I saw those people coming out of Charlottesville carrying torches, literally torches coming out of the fields. Close your eyes, remember what you saw on television. Their veins bulging, their hate-filled speech, chanting the same anti-Semitic bile that was chanted in the streets of Germany in the 30s. And on top of that, accompanied by white supremacists, Ku Klux Klan, a young woman was killed protesting those folks. And the President of the United States was asked, what do you think? And he said, quote, something no president's ever said. He said, they're very fine people on both sides. No president has ever said anything like that. The generic point I'm making is, not all his fault, but it legitimizes. It legitimizes the dark side of human nature. And what it did, though, it also exposed what had not been paid enough attention to, the underlying racism that is institutionalized in the United States, still exists, has existed for 400 years. And so what's happened is that we end up in a circumstance like you had here in Kenosha and have here in Kenosha. But, you know, I had a serious operation years ago, a neurosurgeon, and he gave me a relatively small chance of making it after it was all over. I said, I'll be fine. And he said, you know what your problem is, Senator? He said, you're a congenital optimist. Well, I think we've reached an inflection point in American history. I honest to God believe we have an enormous opportunity now that the screen, the curtain's been pulled back on just what's going on in the country, to do a lot of really positive things. You know, as much as they say that, Black Lives Matter has lost some standing since the president's gone on this rant about, law and order, et cetera, still you have over 50% of the American people supporting it. It was up to 78. That's never happened before. People are beginning to see, because of COVID, who the people are out breaking their necks and risking their lives to keep them safe in their homes. You know that old definition of a firefighter. God made man, and then he made a couple firefighters. You're all crazy, thanks God. I grew up in a neighborhood, you either became a firefighter or a priest. I wasn't qualified for either, so here's who I am. But all kidding aside, think of what's happened. Think of all the people. Who are all those people? You got over 6,000 young dreamers, quote unquote, dreamers, the Hispanic community, who in fact are on the front lines dealing with COVID. You have all those folks working in a supermarket, stacking the shelves, making $5, $6, $7 an hour. In fact, and they're mostly minorities, African Americans, Latinos. People are beginning to figure out who we are as a country. This is not who we are. This is not who we are. So the first point I want to make to you all is, I am not pessimistic. I'm optimistic about the opportunity if we seize it. Now, let me respond to what each of you had to say. Tim, you talked about this a lot more than you got to put money behind the solutions. The country's ready to put that money behind the solutions now. Here's what I'm proposing, and it's going to happen. You point out 30% poverty rate among African Americans. You have living wages don't exist. We're going to nationalize $15 an hour. No one should ever have to work 2 jobs just to make it. That's not right in America. Just 2 jobs just to be above the poverty rate, above the poverty level. Prison reform. There's a whole lot of forms it takes, but my view is we should turn prison reform, and I've been preaching this for the last 5 years, from prison punishment to reform. So, for example, anybody serves their time in prison, they get out, they should be entitled to every single program that exists under the federal government. Why don't we want them getting a Pell Grant and going to school? Why don't we want them getting a job and being able to get public housing subsidies? Why don't we want them qualifying for what used to be called food stamps? But right now, I wrote years ago with a guy named Specter, a senator from Pennsylvania, the Second Chance Act. Because right now we're in a situation where you get out of prison, I think you all know this, you get a bus ticket and $25. By the way, 93% of everybody, 93 out of every 100 prisoners in prison are behind a city jail, a county jail, a state jail, not a federal prison. Brock and I were able to reduce the prison population federally by 38,000 folks. Anybody who gets convicted of a drug crime, not one that is in terms of massive selling, but consumption, they shouldn't go to prison. They should go to mandatory rehabilitation. Instead of building more prisons, I've been proposing for some time, we build rehabilitation centers. Mandatory. They've got to go to mandatory rehab. But it's not part of the record when they get out if they finish it. Because the point you made, you get a record and it stays with you. Sorry, you can't get the job because you did the following, even if it's a misdemeanor. We shouldn't be putting anybody in jail for that. We should find ourselves in a situation where housing, right now in the United States of America, we don't have the kind of housing funding we had back in our administration earlier before that, even in Republican administrations. No one should have to pay more than 30% of their income to be able to live and have housing, including people on the street. That's why I proposed a $400 billion program to vastly increase available housing in America. And by the way, it's not a waste of money. Even the folks on Wall Street point out that will increase the GDP, make it grow. People will do better. People will do better. Hard as the devil for any of your clients who are black to get an entrepreneurial business loan. All the studies show they're just as qualified to be able to succeed as anyone else is. Brock and I put together a program that was $1.5 billion that brought $30 billion off the sidelines. And we provide that program for the local small business associations so you can go and apply. Because guess what? If you get a loan, then the private sector says, hey, he's got government backing him. We're going to join him. We'll get in the deal with him or her. We're going to move that to $150 billion. It's fundamentally changing where we go. Okay, I'm giving you too much. I can see you're about to stand up. Mental health. Mental health is a badly needed commodity right now. That's why in the Affordable Care Act, we insisted it be treated equally. There's no difference between a mental health problem and a physical health problem. They're both related to your health. They should be both covered. You talked about the whole idea of federal support, clinics, and, we need community clinics. You guys are expected to do everything right now. And Barb, you talked about, rebuilding. Well, you know what? Let's get something straight here. Protesting is protesting, my buddy John Lewis used to say. But none of it justifies looting, burning, or anything else. So regardless how angry you are, if you loot or you burn, you should be held accountable as someone who does anything else, period. It just cannot be tolerated across the board. And Angela, you talk about the whole issue of sentencing. One of the things that I proposed is we make sure that prosecutors are able to have to list what the option charges were given to persons. For example, if you're a white guy who can afford a lawyer and you're charged with a crime, you're not charged with 9 crimes, and given 9 alternatives and say, if you plead to the least one, we're going to put you on probation. And you have no lawyer. Or you have a public defender who's getting paid half the federal prosecutor's getting paid. Public defenders are going to get paid the same, federal public defenders, the same amount as prosecutors are going to get paid. So you have representation. Because once you get that on your record, you've got a real problem. Well, 2 people show up for a job, you have that thing you pled to, you weren't guilty of any of it. But rather than run the risk of going to jail for 5 years, you pled to get out from under anything, but you did probation. That happens all the time. That's why we have to have the Federal Department of Justice, which is not much of a Department of Justice right now, have the ability to go and look at the methods that are used by prosecutors in their offices, how they in fact deal with sentencing and what they do. There's a lot more to say, but I probably already said too much, except that there's a lot we're able to do. The public is ready to do these things. I promise you. I promise you. Last piece, education. The idea in the United States of America, your education is determined by your zip code. Title I schools, you all know what a Title I school is, mostly in black and Hispanic neighborhoods, but also poor white neighborhoods where they can't afford the tax base. They don't have the Title I schools are able to get $15 billion a year to make up for the $200 billion gap that exists between them and other school districts, white school districts. Well, guess what? We move that to $45 billion a year. It means I can put every 3, 4, and 5-year-old in school. In school. We've learned a lot in the last 8 years. Every major university and prestigious university in the country has pointed out that it increases by 58% the chances that that child, no matter what home they came from, will get all the way through all 12 years of school. It also insists that we provide for, right now we have one school psychologist for every 1,505 kids in America. We know now that about 60% of a child's brain is developed by the time they reach that age. And anxiety that exists with children that can be identified early is able to be dealt with, anxiety. But they don't do it now because they can't pick it up. And there's a situation, again, where when you do that, we know that the most at-risk generation for the first time in American history is the Z generation. They have the greatest degree of anxiety of any generation all the way up the scale, no matter where they are. We've also learned, and I'll end with this. I know you're getting too antsy. Sit down, man.
No, I get it.
Okay? Here.
How do I do that?
Here's
Right?
the last
How do I
thing.
stop that?
But this is important. Here's the deal. If you think about it, we've finally figured out drug abuse doesn't cause mental health problems. Mental health problems cause drug abuse. And if you don't detect the anxiety in children early and deal with it and treat it, you increase exponentially the prospect that they're going to be, in fact, find themselves susceptible to what's happening in the community. The generic point I'm making is there's so much we can do. So much we can do. And we can do it just by eliminating the tax cut for the top 1/10 of 1%, which is $1,350 billion, has done nothing to help anybody. 19 corporations making $1 billion apiece don't pay a single penny in taxes. I'm not going to punish anybody, but everybody should pay a fair share. And I can lay out for you. I won't now because they'll shoot me. But here's the deal. I pay for every single thing I'm proposing without raising your taxes 1 penny. If you make less than $400,000, you're not going to get a penny tax, and you're going to get a tax cut if you make under $125,000. So it's not we can't do this. We haven't been willing to do this. But I think the public's ready. I'll do whatever you tell me, boss.
You are the boss. I know when my dad would tell me to sit down, I sat down. So I'm good. I'm good. I think what you heard here was strength, experience, and empathy. And what we do know is that Vice President Biden, you and Kamala Harris have the leadership and strength to restore faith and healing in this country. We're going to appreciate you very much. We're going to continue the community conversations because I'm sure you have more to